One of the joys of the past decade's indie boom is the increase in the amount of games that are able to strip away the bells and whistles of modern game design, focusing instead on a core gameplay experience with simple, thoughtful design centered around one or two strong ideas. This is especially true for Limbo, the physics-driven silhouette-based puzzle platformer released by Playdead Studios way back in 2010. With a visual palette based entirely on the interplay between darkness and light, and gameplay that boils down to jumping, grabbing, and pushing stuff, Limbo feels like one of the true poster children for modern indie games. We'll see if it earned its status when I complete Limbo.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to another brand new episode of The Completionist. We are deep into the month of October now, which means it's almost the end of spooky season. And with lots of different ways to get freaked out all month long, I thought we could get creeped out in a more mellow, artful way with Limbo. Especially in these scary times, we all need a break from the real world, which is why I am diving headfirst into this dark and ambiguous tale about a lonely boy lost in a hostile and confusing world where nothing makes sense and everything wants to kill him. No parallels to the real world of any kind at all, just good old-fashioned escapism. With that said, let's complete Limbo. Yes!
While indie games can be as varied and unique as snowflakes, there's no end to the indie titles that have attempted to bring their own artistic style to one of gaming's most tried and true genres, the platformer. Moving a two-dimensional character over platforms and past enemies, usually while collecting something shiny, is a pastime as old as gaming itself, which is why it makes sense that as indie developers embraced the freedom that a small development team could bring, the platformer has presented itself as the perfect blank canvas for cool and weird indie games. Playdead Studios decided to take a spooky minimalistic approach with Limbo, which took about 6 years to make from conception to release. And if you've ever been pregnant, which I admit I have not, then the phrase 6 years from conception to release is terrifying enough all on its own. Limbo went through plenty of changes during development, as its development team grew from 2 to 16, but the core visual style was in place from the very beginning. Limbo was always going to be a monochromatic platformer with a heavy emphasis on trial and error, simple but challenging puzzles, and a loose abstract story. I don't want to keep comparing this game to my life, but loose abstract story with a heavy emphasis on trial and error is depressingly accurate. And other people connected to Limbo too, with great reviews and a spot secured in the modern indie game pantheon. Initially exclusive to the Xbox 360, Limbo gradually made its way to Steam and PS3, plus later releases on the Xbox One and PS4 marketplaces. It's that PS4 version that I'll be completing today, which was also recently released as a part of a package deal with Playdead's follow-up Inside. In keeping with the minimalist approach, Limbo looks to be a pretty short, succinct completion experience, with only 1 or 2 small roadblocks between me and whatever comes after Limbo. Is it heaven? Hell? With the way that I've been living? Who can really say? But before facing eternal judgment or whatever, I've got to explore every inch of Limbo. The first thing I'll have to do is play through the story, which is broken up into about 40 teeny tiny little chapters that can be jumped to once they've been completed. Like in most platformers, completing the story means moving to the right until I can't move to the right anymore, solving puzzles and removing obstacles along the way. Next up, I'll have to find all of the glowing insect eggs, Limbo's only real collectible. Each of these eggs also unlocks an achievement, and they are hidden in some fairly tricky and devious spots throughout the game. But I'm gonna track them down and squish them all, because I love completing things almost as much as I hate bugs. So I'll be killing 2 birds with 1 stone, or 2 unborn insects with 1 foot. Once I prevented the birth of a whole insect generation, there's only one thing left to do: completing the game's 2 non-egg related achievements, which are definitely the biggest challenge that Limbo has to offer. One of them requires the completion of a tricky secret area where you have to depend almost entirely on sound, and the other necessitates the completion of the entire game with less than 5 deaths and in one sitting. While I'm not too worried about the secret last level, that last trophy has me worried quite a bit, just because so much of Limbo is built around dying over and over while figuring out what you did wrong. So, needless to say, my first playthrough is unlikely to fall under that 5 death limit. But with a little bit of practice on some of the harder puzzles and the familiarity built up playing through the game the first time through, it should be well within my reach. All it requires is recklessly throwing myself at a problem over and over again until a solution presents itself. Fortunately, this part has absolutely no parallels to my real life and is in no way at all too real or an accurate reflection of my day-to-day struggle in this cruel and meaningless world.
Hey man, are you okay?
What? Yeah, I'm fine. Why?
No reason.
Limbo does away with everything but light, shadow, and ambient sound to create a vibe that's minimalist, but also pretty damn immersive. Sometimes that minimalism came off to me as laziness, like the game's almost total lack of interest in telling a story, but I think it's mostly worth it to contribute to the spooky, surreal experience of being lost in Limbo. Limbo places players in the shoes of a delicate little shadow baby known only as the Boy, on a quest through the wilds of Limbo to find his sister. And as far as the plot goes, that's it. There are some hints at a larger world with glimpses of other people and an abandoned cityscape that implies more to this black and white reality. But the game leaves it up to the players to infer what they want from those little tidbits of world building. When Limbo came out, there was some debate between those who wanted a bit more of a fleshed out story and those who were perfectly content to formulate their own theories. And while I have no problem with a game that wants its audience to fill in some of the gaps, the story in Limbo is made up almost entirely of gaps. It's Gap City over here, y'all. I'm not saying I needed a traditional plot from Limbo, but a little bit more of an emotional arc would have been nice. It's something these stripped down artsy games usually excel at, but Limbo chooses to focus on atmosphere instead. It isn't helped by the fact that almost all of the scripted events, including one featuring a big old spider that will haunt my dreams until the end of my days, takes place in the game's first half. Once the freaky spider-infested forest gives way to an empty cityscape of industrial decay, it feels like some of the air has been let out of the boy's journey. That loneliness fits with the sad, spooky tone that Limbo is going for. But what makes the first half so much more successful is that it balances that sad, silhouetted shadowscape with some genuine tension and menace. Or maybe that's just the first half's much higher spider quotient. I really hate spiders, you guys. Spider-Man? Great. Spider-Ted? Yeah, why not? Spider anything else? Nah, get out. Get out. But there's still plenty of unease to be found in the game's animations and environments. The physics in Limbo are great, and that extends to the death animations, where our beautiful little shadow boy gets squished, stabbed, and sliced by a variety of nasty hazards. And if you think I'm being sensitive, take it from Sandman to the Three Master Gamers.
I think it is an interesting game and has some gruesome moments.
There's something about watching a little kid get impaled by a spider that's deeply upsetting, even in silhouette, and the bodies littering the floor in the early part of the game act as a threat that the game isn't afraid to carry through with. Obviously, there's very little detail given the nature of the game's design, but Playdead does a great job of fitting things in around the shadowy edges of the world. From the boy's creepy pinprick eyes to weeds and jagged pops bursting forth from the ground. It's a great example of doing a lot with a little, like killing 30 birds with one stone, or making a living out of being good at video games. Not that I'm thinking of anyone specific, I swear. Limbo's soundscape also does a lot with nothing at all, eschewing anything resembling a traditional soundtrack. It all comes from sounds within the world, and it does a great job of making you feel alone in a vast and hostile landscape, especially as natural sounds like the running of water and the buzzing of insects gives way to the whirring of saws and clanking of steel. The game's secret unlockable area even forces you to use sounds to navigate obstacles, which would never work if the sound design wasn't on point. The sound sound in Limbo almost never calls attention to itself, but plays a major role in sucking players into its world of spiders and shadows. There's no real interface or menus of any kind, which feels right. You don't really need any, and they'd only interrupt the experience anyway. Overall, every design element drops you squarely in a boy's tiny little shadowy shoes. A total lack of menu or any kind of instructions, the ominous sights and sounds of a hostile alien landscape, and even the lack of a traditional story to tell you what you're supposed to be feeling. Just like in my... You know what? Nope, never mind.
Were you about to compare it to your real life?
Maybe. Can I get a hug?
Oh, come here, baby.
Simplicity continues to be the rule of thumb in Limbo's gameplay, resulting in a puzzle platformer where the focus gets to remain solidly on the puzzles and the platforms, and a completion experience that's pretty quick, straightforward, and enjoyable throughout. The only things you can do in Limbo are walk, jump, and grab stuff, which are all the abilities I've ever needed so far in the real world, and they're all I ever needed in Limbo too. While there are some fancy new mechanics late in the game, like using switches to affect gravity, almost everything else can be accomplished by pushing stuff around and grabbing ledges. It wouldn't work without thoughtful level design, and Limbo repeatedly pulls off this neat trick where an obstacle feels impossible, until you really look around and notice every aspect of your surroundings. Everything is placed to reward players who are paying attention, and it feels great to finally figure out what this shadowy world is asking of you. Can't get past that spider? It's probably got something to do with that bear trap you saw earlier. Can't reach that ladder? Maybe you can trick that flying bug you saw into helping you. The art style sometimes hides what you're looking for, but also clears away all the clutter until the only option left is the correct one. On a first playthrough of Limbo, death is not only a regular occurrence, but how you learn to navigate each of Limbo's puzzles. This means that there are no real consequences to dying other than watching the boy's gruesome murder over and over again. But if you can handle that, then you're encouraged to try any and all ideas, even if they get you squished, shot, or stabbed. While Limbo doesn't have enemies in the traditional sense, there are a few malevolent forces out there to get you in the game's first half, like the giant spider, some automatic machine gun sentries, and even a couple of random villagers with spears. Rather than having to defeat these enemies though, they're all just living obstacles in the game's cornucopia of creepy puzzles. And make no mistake, Limbo is at its core a puzzle game. The platforming elements require timing and such, but it's really all about figuring out what each area is asking of you, and then executing that maneuver with all of the skill and dexterity that our delicate little shadow boy can muster. The boy's limited maneuverability makes a lot of the puzzles all about working within the game's physics, and it feels truly dangerous during the game's first half. There are even brain slugs that limit you to moving in only one direction, which I guess isn't actually that bad compared to what you normally expect from goddamn brain slugs. But once you're in the industrial portion though, the puzzles get a lot more, puzzle-esque, with switches, elevators, and electrified floors. Some people might prefer these more straightforward brain benders, but it's all gonna come down to how much of a puzzle person you are. Same goes for the hiding spots for the insect eggs, which vary from pretty obvious to tricky as hell. But the limited number of eggs in the game keeps them from being a frustration. It's no big chore to find those eggs, squish them, and keep any more frickin' spiders from entering this earth. The last thing we need is more spiders, which brings us to the trophies, most of which unlock as you break all the bug eggs. But it still leaves the secret area and the thankless task of doing a one-sitting run with 5 deaths or less. Now, the secret underground area is hard, given that most of it is totally in the dark, but I got through it with the same gumption and resolve that got me through the rest of the game, and that's a lot of deaths, but mostly gumption. And I didn't have the benefit of trial and error on the deathless run, which still had a couple of deaths, but death light runs just don't have the same ring to it. I made sure to practice the last few harder puzzles before my attempts, just because I didn't want my perfect run to get tanked at the very end by some particularly unforgiving buzzsaws. But I only ended up having to start over once or twice, due to my own overconfidence. It's actually kind of neat how the game encourages experimentation most of the time, only to demand that you be careful as hell if you want that last trophy. All in all, there's a reason that Limbo is considered a modern indie darling. It's a quick experience without being insanely easy, beautiful without ever having to resort to a single color beyond black and white, and artful without sacrificing solid puzzle-based gameplay. It's even got me feeling a little bit better about my life. Or maybe that's just because I've been hugging Brett this whole time.
This isn't weird, right?
In keeping with Limbo's less is more ethos, the only unlockable thing in the entire game is the secret challenge zone you get for breaking all of the trophy eggs. That's fine though, because it honestly would have felt weird if there had been a whole bunch of unlockable nonsense. It's just really not that kind of game. Same goes for the lack of a 100% bonus. You can jump between chapters once you're done if you're in love with a specific puzzle, but it's not like you're suddenly going to unlock a lightsaber or whatever. Although honestly, I'd be down with that. But even without a lightsaber, Limbo was mostly a pretty chill and quick completion experience. That run with 5 deaths or less made me a bit nervous, but didn't end up breaking my brain too much. If I had had the misfortune to die a bunch right before the finish line, I might be singing a different tune. But fortunately, the gods of Limbo smiled upon me on this day. While I completed Limbo, there were 48 deaths, 39 chapters completed, 11 insect eggs squashed, 13 total trophies unlocked, 6.5 total hours of playtime, and 2 beautiful Brett shoulders for me to lean on when life and Limbo start to blur together. Limbo's a creepy but breezy experience that can be blown through in a day, insect eggs and all. The only real sticking point is that last achievement, which is a great challenge if you just need more of the boy's creepy pinprick eyes in your life. It's a fun new way to approach Limbo's puzzle-filled world, but doesn't feel congruous with the casual experimentation that distinguishes the rest of the game.
So it looks like I've made my way through Limbo and found myself in a new wonderful place that looks a lot like my office, but I'm still glad I decided to give in to October's spooky vibes by playing through Limbo, which is quick and short enough to make it worth doing everything, including that run where you have to beat the game with 5 or less deaths. It's not that bad, it's definitely a challenge, but it may be worth it for some of you out there. So, with that in mind, guys, I give this game my completionist rating of complete it.
Complete it!
That's all the time we have for today, guys, so please, as always, let me know what you thought about today's episode somewhere on the internet. If you like the show, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button to stay up to date, hit that bell, hit all notifications. We have videos on Wednesdays and Saturdays, and hey, we did an awesome fun brand deal with Nintendo and Bandai Namco last week on Dark Souls, so give that a click or tap right here. Guys, I've been Gerard the Completionist, and I'll see you next week for another brand new episode. Bye!